One of the more interesting bits of news that we got for the Nintendo Switch 2 was that Resident Evil Requiem would be launching day and date on the Nintendo Switch 2 as other platforms, and it kind of blew people away because we hadn't had too many games when it comes to new titles coming up for the Switch 2 being announced for day and date launches, especially so close to the February release date of the game. So it kind of sent people a little bit back, but then there was a ton of questions. How's it going to perform? How's it going to look? What's going on with game keycards? What's going on with this title? And I think that it's become very clear now at this point, considering that Nintendo is heavily invested into Resident Evil Requiem, what this is going to be and how it is a super important game when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 for a variety of reasons that we are going to talk about. Now, the first thing here, this is the first major third-party game launching day and date on the Nintendo Switch 2 plus other platforms. Now, we've had smaller games, we've had AA titles, we've had some great stuff overall, or even some things like Hades that launches first on the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2, and we do have other games like 007 game that's coming out, but that's going to be after Resident Evil Requiem. We have Final Fantasy VII Remake integrated, but once again, that already launched 5 years ago on the PlayStation 4. So this is the first big AAA major title that you wouldn't necessarily expect, especially coming off of the Nintendo Switch 1, to launch day and date on the Nintendo Switch 2. But obviously the increase in horsepower, and I would say the shifting dynamics of the marketplace overall, definitely puts Nintendo in a good position with this title. And I think that that is super important that fans know that yes, we can get some major third-party titles launched day and date on the Nintendo Switch 2, and hopefully it performs and runs well. But based off of what we've seen so far, it definitely seems like it's going to be that. So that is a huge confidence boost when it comes to the consumers out there, when it comes to people that are buying the system, that maybe not everything, but it is definitely possible that we can get major AAA titles day and date, which if you look back at the Nintendo Switch 1, that pretty much never happened. I'm looking back and I'm thinking, and I always ask my chat this whenever I'm streaming, is like, what game can we even point to and say, okay, that was a major AAA title that launched day and date on the Nintendo Switch 1 and Xbox and PlayStation, and it's really hard to find anything. So the fact that we already have one at this point, less than a year into the system's launch, is definitely good. And of course, there's other games like the new 007 game that's coming, that's also day and date, and more games that are going to be announced in the future, especially games from Japanese developers. Now, the next big thing here is the marketing presence on the Nintendo Switch 2. Recently, we found out that there's going to be an amiibo overhaul. There's going to be a Pro Controller, a huge generation pack that gets you Resident Evil Requiem, Resident Evil 7 Gold Edition, and Resident Evil 8 Gold Edition, all in one big pack, 3 separate key cards, and one cool packaging for $89.99. That is pretty incredible when it comes to the deal, but it's a limited time thing, it seems. They're going to stop selling that around the end of March. So that is a marketing thing. That is huge with the Amiibo and Pro Controller. They definitely want people, or more like Nintendo and Capcom, have teamed up to kind of teeter people's thoughts and minds. Like, okay, this is a Nintendo Switch 2 game as well. Now, if you look at it, obviously, Xbox, PlayStation, PC, bigger install base when it comes to it, but things like this definitely tell people, wait a minute, hold up, I can get all of those games when it comes down to it for a good price and on a platform that I can play anywhere that I want, and I can buy this cool Pro Controller that you're not going to have on other systems, and the Amiibo is going to be there. So from a marketing standpoint, in terms of mindshare, this is big. They clearly, between Capcom and Nintendo, want this to be in the minds of multi-platform gamers that have a Switch 2, PlayStation, or something else, or people that are going to be purchasing a Nintendo Switch 2. Maybe you want to buy it on this piece of hardware overall. So to me, that huge marketing presence and all the collaborations that they're doing, this is one of the reasons why it's one of the most important games overall when it comes down to it. But it's also important that if you're not subscribed to the channel, that you go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you want some of the best Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more on the internet. Also hit that like button and let me know what you're looking forward to the most when it comes to Resident Evil Requiem or Resident Evil on the Nintendo Switch 2 going forward. All right, let's talk about the hardware when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 in comparison. This is important because there was a lot of talk about the hardware beforehand from Digital Foundry and from people on the internet that it's not going to be able to handle a lot of the AAA games that come out, and it's going to be held back in a lot of different ways. And some of that, from what we've seen, can be like, okay, we don't have the frame rate as much, maybe like a Star Wars Outlaws, it's 30 FPS instead of the 60 FPS on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, but when you compare it to Xbox Series S, it actually performs very well in comparison to a lot of the games that have came out on that platform, like Apex Legends or Street Fighter 6 or Cyberpunk 2077. So the Nintendo Switch 2 has shown a bit that it can hold its own, but then it also needs to prove that it can have day-and-date games, big AAA titles launch, and it's right up there. So it needs to continue to prove itself every single time, and I think that this one will be a big test as well. But from what we've seen, from the demos that they've shown off and people playing the game, it looks like it runs and plays very well. Now, it was in an enclosed area. What happens when there's bigger areas and more enemies on screen? Like, how will the Nintendo Switch 2 perform? But like I said, based off of what we've gotten so far, and I'm pretty sure they're not done with the optimization and the game just yet, they kind of picked an area that would perform well when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2. I think once we see everything, then we can kind of get a better idea. But based off of what we've gotten before, like I stated, with stuff like Cyberpunk, in addition to Star Wars Outlaws and Street Fighter 6, Apex Legends, some of the bigger games that have came over, as long as they do a great job with optimization, Switch 2 should be able to handle this, and I think it should look somewhat comparable, especially if you're talking about a hybrid platform that's clearly not as strong as a PlayStation 5. So I'm very interested to seeing that when it comes to the test of the Switch 2 hardware. Now let's talk about something else when it comes to the sales performance, because we can discuss when it comes to launching day and day and the marketing and all sorts of other stuff with it. But if the game doesn't put up numbers for a big AAA title, that's not going to, I would say, lock in confidence when it comes to other big AAA titles from Capcom coming over or Resident Evil. So I do think that the performance sales-wise is really important, especially with a smaller but growing install base of the Nintendo Switch 2. Clearly, Xbox Series and PlayStation 5 and PC have bigger user bases right now at this point, but how will things be later down the line? Will things be a bit different later down the line overall? The Switch 2 is clearly selling at a good clip, and there's other system sellers that are coming out that are going to help out when it comes to it, especially in 2026. You've got Fire Emblem, you've got Mario Tennis, you've got Yoshi, and there's going to be other big announcements for the Nintendo Switch 2. So I can see the Switch 2 sales continue to rise, but I think that it's going to be important to see exactly how much it does and the splits and what people are interested in picking up when it comes to the game, because once again, there is a big install base difference, but the hype of having this big AAA game anywhere that you want is definitely going to be enticing for many people. I personally already pre-ordered the Generation Pack for the Nintendo Switch 2. I was set on buying this game on PlayStation 5. I didn't know how it was going to perform overall, but after seeing it run just a bit at this point, in addition to seeing that Generation Pack, plus the Amiibo support, plus the Pro Controller, I'm like, okay, well, hold up. Let me see if I want to get it on the Nintendo Switch 2, and I couldn't pass up getting those 3 games with all the DLC for $90 in a limited edition pack that probably isn't going to be around. So might be the first buy now before rare game key card editions overall when it comes to that, or at least if you have all of them in that pack. So to me, the sales performance is going to be super important when it comes down to it. Now, I think that another thing that's really important is the portable version. I think that's vital for Japan, especially pairing it with that new third-person mode. Now, for those who don't know, there was an issue with the first-person Resident Evil games. They were great when it comes to the immersion for some people, and when it comes to just playing a game and kind of having that feeling of horror when it comes to Resident Evil, but others get motion sickness. Others have issues, especially in Japan, when it comes to the first-person perspective. So Capcom, seeing all of the different people talking about this, actually patched in a third-person mode for for Resident Evil 8. Now, is it a little bit wonky? Yes, because the game wasn't designed with third person in mind, but they did the best that they could, and I think that was a good idea, because now I'm actually going to play Resident Evil Village, just because I couldn't deal with it when it comes to the first person in Resident Evil 7. I think the game is good, but I stopped playing. So I think that having, once again, the portable version with a third person mode, and having that for Japan, where you can have that hybrid play with Switch 2, where the Switch 2 sales are exploding in that country with Pokemon Legends ZA that's coming and boosting things up, and it's going to accelerate in the holiday here as Nintendo tries to ship more units to Japan. I think that that is super important overall for the Japanese gamers out there, and of course for people who don't like first person. So to me, all of it kind of connects together when it comes to how important that version, when it comes to Switch 2 version with the third person mode in Japan, is going to be, because we've seen in Japan, if you're not launching on Switch 2 or Switch, the sales are kind of hard to come by at times when it comes down to it. So I think that that was important for Capcom, and of course it's important for Nintendo as well. Now, the last thing here is game key cards and how that's going to perform in the best conditions. We've had some other game key cards come out that were kind of overpriced, or they were late ports, or they didn't offer enough in terms of what people were looking for with a new game. Or you can simply pick up the on-disc versions or the cartridge version even on the Nintendo Switch 1 and do updates. But how will a game key card perform in the best conditions when it comes to good marketing, like we're seeing here with the Generation Pack and getting all 3 of the games for $90? You look at the amiibo, you look at the stuff that's kind of enticing people to pick up the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game. How's it going to perform when it's day and date and not a late port for full price? It's coming out with the other systems and everything, and the fact that you can play that, once again, anywhere that you want when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 and what that offers. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the game key cards perform, especially in Japan compared to PlayStation 5, where Resident Evil still sells pretty good overall. How does it perform compared to PlayStation 5 in there? And of course, here in the West, how does the key cards perform when it comes to a new game in the top 10 Circana sales, for example? So I think that there is a lot to kind of look at when it comes to how this game could do as a game key card and what the future could be for game key cards if this does well compared to what we've seen in the past. So to me, there's a lot of reasons why Resident Evil Requiem is a really important game. We kind of went over a number of different things here, from the status of it, obviously Resident Evil, the fact that it's going to be a big AAA game, launching day and date, big marketing with Nintendo hardware, and pushing the Nintendo Switch 2. There's so many different ways that this can go, but I do think that ultimately Resident Evil Requiem is probably going to do well on the Nintendo Switch 2, and I think it's going to ensure more confidence that we get other big Resident Evil games in the future. And I think that Capcom is also going to do Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, all of those remakes, in some type of generation pack or some type of pretty cool thing, probably announced at a Nintendo Direct in the future. I think that this is just the start with this, and I kind of just, I would say, foreshadow. Sometimes Capcom can be incredibly, I would say, obvious in what they're going to do when it comes to predictions. It's not hard to predict kind of what Capcom will do at times, because they do things a lot by the book. So I'm guessing that we're going to get a generation pack with Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 in the future, just like we got a generation pack type of thing with the Nintendo Switch 1 with Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 on there. So I'm guessing we're going to get that as well in 2026 at some point. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that performs once we get that, because it's coming, guys. But what do you think overall when it comes to everything that we discussed here? What do you think is super important about Resident Evil Requiem as a third-party title coming out February 27th? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 and RPG content right here on screen. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.